lesson 5-8. Today we're going to be talking about solving equations with rational numbers. So we're going to be pulling on two lessons that we have learned in the past. One about solving one-step equations. So that's when you're solving for x and things like that and you only have to make one step. And also talking about rational numbers, which as a refresher, a rational number is a number that can be written as a fraction. So for example, 0.75 or 75 hundredths, because you can write 75 over 100 and then simplify. 2/7, obviously that is already in fraction form, so it's already a fraction, a rational number. And then whole numbers like 8. So 8 can be written as 8 over 1, and that's fraction form. Alright, so in order to solve these types of equations, you solve them like solving algebraic equations with whole numbers, like we did with the one steps. So you do the inverse operations to solve for the variable. So like in this example right here, we have 2.1 or 2 and 1/10 equals t minus 8.5 or 8 and 5/10. So we're going to be solving for a variable again, and we're going to have to do the inverse or the opposite operation. So remember, if the number is positive or if we're adding a number, we're going to subtract it on both sides, because we're going to take it off of this side and take it off of this side to see what is left over, to see what x is equal to, or n, or whatever your variable is. If it's a negative number or subtracting a number, you're going to add it to both sides to cancel it out. If it's multiplying, like if it's a number like 2.5x, then you're going to have to divide 2.5 on both sides to get rid of the 2.5 to solve for that variable. If it's dividing like x over 2, you'd multiply by 2 on both sides so that you can solve for your variable. So just a little refresher. Opposite operation is called the inverse. Alright, so when adding and subtracting decimals, this is kind of like just a little refresher. Line up your place values. So you can't just add them up. You have to have the decimals in line and all the other numbers in line on both sides of the decimal place. So then you can add them up or subtract them and get the correct answer. Also, when adding and subtracting fractions, don't forget to get the like denominators. So this is also pulling on another lesson that we just learned, which was the least common multiple, or least common denominator. So we're kind of putting these three lessons together to make another lesson. So let's go ahead and do some practice. Alright, let's go ahead and look at our first example. Number 1, it says n minus 9.7 or 9 and 7/10 equals negative 13.9 or negative 13 and 9/10. Now, the first thing I want to look at is my signs. So it's kind of like, what is going on here? What kind of numbers are we dealing with? Because just as we have talked about many times, adding and subtracting integers, adding and subtracting rational numbers, it makes a difference if your number is negative or not. So we need to pay attention. So now let's go ahead and solve for n. So this is going to be the number we're going to be solving for. So we have to get rid of everything else. So in this case, we only have one other number added on or subtracted from it. So we only have to do one step. So let's go ahead and do the opposite. So this is a negative or subtracting 9.7. So we're going to add 9.7. So add it on both sides. So that's going to cancel that out. So, and we're going to have to add it over here. Now, be very careful. If you try to check your answer, and if you tried to subtract this, you would have figured out that you did not get 0. We need to get 0 because we're taking it off of this side, and we're taking it off of this side, so we can figure out what this n is equal to. Okay, so just check yourself as you go. Okay, let's go ahead and subtract. Now, I know it's saying adding here, but we have one negative sign, and just like we talked about in class, that if you have two numbers with different signs, you're going to subtract them and take the sign of the bigger number. So let's go ahead and subtract them. 9 minus 7 gives you 2, and then we have our decimal places all lined up. 13 minus 9 is going to give you a 4, and then our answer is going to be negative because 13.9 is bigger than 9.7. So now we know n is equal to negative 4.2. Okay, let's go ahead and do example number 2. We have 7 over 10, or 7/10, plus p equals 2/5. Now let's go ahead and solve for p. I'm going to look for my signs. I see all positive numbers, so it's kind of make it a little bit easier for me. Now I'm going to go ahead and subtract 7/10 from both sides. Okay, now I see something very important I need to do. these denominators are not the same, so I want to go ahead and get them the same. So I'm going to multiply this by 2 and this by 2, and then I have to do both the numerator and the denominator to keep it balanced, because I want a 10 in the denominator. So 5 times 2 will give you 10. So we're going to have 4 over 10 minus 7 over 10. So now I see that I'm subtracting a bigger number from a smaller number. So I know my answer, P, is going to be negative. So let's go ahead and subtract them. 7 minus 4 is going to give you 3. So it's going to be 3/10. So it's going to be a negative 3/10 is what P is equal to. All right? Let's go ahead and look at number 3. It says 6a equals negative 8.4. Okay, so anytime you see a number and a variable, or a coefficient and a variable, that's multiplication. So 6a means 6 times a. Okay? So now since I know that I'm doing multiplication, I need to do the inverse operation, which is the opposite. So the opposite of multiplication is division. So let's go ahead and divide by 6 on both sides. Now, I realize I have a negative over here. So I have one negative and one positive. So I know that my answer is going to be negative. So a is going to be a negative number. So let's go ahead and do our math on the side, figure out what that number is. We have 8.4 divided by 6. So 6 goes into 8 one time. 6, subtract 2, bring down your 4. 6 times 4 is 24. And then we're going to get 0. Now I want to go ahead and bring up that decimal place right here. So our answer is going to be negative 1.4. Okay? Let's go ahead and look at the next example. We have negative 36 equals negative 5z. Now, I'm going to go ahead and identify my variable that I'm solving for, which is z on this side. So I'm going to go ahead and take everything away from this side and take it off of both sides, so I'll see what z is equal to. So let's go ahead and divide by a negative 5. Now, you cannot forget your signs here. So divide by negative 5 on both sides. I see that I have two negatives divided by each other, so my answer is going to be positive. So z is going to equal a positive number. Now, it's going to obviously be a decimal because 35 does not go to 36 evenly. Let's divide it out. Divided by 5, it goes in 7 times. So I'll give you 35 minus 1.0. Bring it down. 5 goes into 10 2 times. Let's go ahead and bring up our decimal. So it's going to be a positive 7.2, or 7 and 2/10. All right, let's go ahead and look at our next example. We have 10 equals 1/6h. So right now, you can think of this as two different ways. You can think of it as 1/6 times h, or this is the same exact thing, just in a different form, h over 6. That might make it a little bit easier to realize what we're doing. Because we are multiplying by 1/6, but that's also dividing by 6. If you're multiplying and there's just a number in the denominator and nothing in the numerator, so we're just dividing. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply each side by 6, because that is the inverse. So now I have 6 times 10, which gives me 60, equals, these 6's are going to cancel out, so I'm going to have h is equal to 60. So that was pretty easy. We have no negatives or anything, so it doesn't change the sign of our answer. Let's go ahead and look at number 6. We have 5/8 times m equals negative 3. Now this time, we have to do something different. We need to figure out how to get this fraction gone completely. Because here we're technically multiplying by 5 and dividing by 8. Now, whenever you get a fraction as a coefficient of your variable, we are going to go ahead and multiply by the inverse, or the reciprocal. So we're going to go ahead and flip this fraction and multiply by it. So we're going to multiply by 8/5 over here, multiply by 8/5 over here. Now, look how important it is to multiply by the reciprocal. These 5's are going to cancel out if you're cross-canceling. These 8's are going to cancel out. And you're going to be left with 1, which is exactly what we want. So let's go ahead. We're going to have m is equal to, I know for sure my answer is going to be negative because there's one negative, so I'm going to go ahead and put it there. I'm going to put it there now because I don't want to forget it. So let's go ahead and do 8 times 3, which is going to give you 24 over 5. So I'm going to go ahead and figure out what that is in decimal form, just for my personal preference here. So 5 goes into 24 about 4 times. You're going to get 20. Subtract, you're going to get 4.0. Bring down that 0, bring up the decimal, it goes into 48 times, so it's going to be negative 4.8. Okay, let's go ahead and look at our last example. It says a pair of shoes that normally costs $45 now costs $30. What fraction of the regular price is the reduced price? So we are comparing these two prices. What fraction of this original price is the new price? So we know we're going to be looking for a fraction for an answer. So we know that for sure. I also know that it starts at $45 and it's now $30. So I'm going to go ahead and write myself an equation. I'm going to say, what fraction would I have to multiply my original price by? We'll just make it a p for some reason. And then, so 45 times p is going to give me 30. So I'm going to go ahead and solve for my price. I'm going to divide by 45, divide by 45, and then I'll simplify. And I can divide out 5 because they both go into 5. And I'll get 6 over 9. I can also divide out a 3 and be left with 2/30. So my original price, or my new price, is 2/3 of the original price. So I also want you to think of it as, you could think of it as the part over the whole. So you could take 30 over 45 right away because this is the total price and this is the partial price. So you could figure out the fraction from there and then reduce, but I went ahead and wrote myself an equation so I understand that I'm doing something to this 45 to get the 30. So either way you want to do it, it's completely fine. Alright, make sure you've watched the entire video from the beginning to the end, and if you have questions you can bring them to me tomorrow, or you can also try to look in your book and try to figure them out for yourself, because sometimes those are the questions that you understand them, or you get and they stick in your head a little bit more if you're spending the time to think about it and mull over it and try to figure it out yourself. So that is really an important step. So try to do that before you bring your questions into class tomorrow, but I'll be happy to answer those anyways. Alright, good luck on your own questions. Alright, you have 5 problems to do for me. Go ahead and use the inverse operation to go ahead and solve for the variable. Good luck, we'll see what you get tomorrow.